much for joining us for this session on the regulation of heat, a new era for heat networks.
Sexy title.
Sexy title. So my name is Rachael Mills. I work for a company called SE2, and we do a lot of stakeholder engagement in the heat network sector. I'm joined by Mike Reynolds from Vattenfall, Nicola Beech, who's a councillor at Bristol Council, and Ken Hunnisett from Triple Point. You can look up their biographies because they're all on the website. We're going to move straight on into the actual session. So a little bit about heat networks. There is currently 14,000 heat networks in the UK, serving about 500,000 customers, which provides about 2% of all of the heat in the country. Now, all of the Climate Change Committee projections for hitting our 2050 targets say that that proportion of customers is going to go up to 18%. So there's heat networks are going to have massive growth over the next 30 years, and in fact they are already growing very quickly. Government has lots of ambition and drive and are showing a lot of leadership on growing the heat network sector, and they are an excellent solution for decarbonising heat in urban areas. There's other solutions for other areas. They're not a golden bullet for everything, but in urban areas, they can really help, tackle the knotty problem of decarbonising heat. We are on the cusp of regulation right now. So the heat network market framework was in the Queen's speech a few weeks ago, which means Ofgem is going to become the regulator for heat in the same way as it is the regulator for the gas and electricity markets. That's got to go through primary legislation, and there's lots of consultations going on, and we're expecting that to start to bite from 2024. So there's lots of getting ready for all of those sorts of things. The good thing about regulation is it provides, hopefully, one of the purposes is it will provide investor confidence. That's one of the purposes for why BEIS is doing all of those things, as well as customer protection and rights and licenses and things like that. So that's what's coming. What we're going to talk about a bit today is to give you a bit more of a perspective on heat networks from a sort of a city perspective. So Bristol is doing heat networks right now. So what does that look like for them, and why are they doing that, and how have they set it up so it is investable? Mike's going to talk a bit about what it means for developers and property owners in terms of land value and why is it investable for you, and how regulation is helping to support that. And then Ken is an investor, and he's going to tell us a bit from his point of view how the landscape is changing, and how now is the moment, and these things are happening right now. So that's the plan. So with no further ado, Mike.
So district heating heat networks in the UK have garnered a bit of a bad reputation over the last 20 years, and I think some property companies will have done heat networks and regretted it. They are good, they do work. We've got 98% penetration of district heating in Sweden, and we're here to kind of work out how to do it more effectively in the UK and roll it out at scale. And I'm going to now hopefully hand over to Nicola to talk about rolling it out at scale in Bristol and how you've been approaching it in Bristol. That was a filler for you.
Thanks, Mike. It's working. Hi, everyone. My name's Nicola Beech. I'm a councillor in Bristol, and I'm also the Cabinet Member for Planning. And prior to that was the Cabinet Member for Energy. It's great to be here to talk about Bristol's story. I think before we talk about our relationship with heat networks, I just briefly need to step back before we step forward. So Bristol's got a sort of reputation as an eco-city, if you will. We were previously the green capital. And our investment in renewables over the last 10 years is about 60 million. And so the heat networks is a really vital part of that jigsaw. But I just want to take this opportunity, as I've got this audience here, to talk about our commitment to community wealth building, because I think what's really important is not just about decarbonising the city, it's also about doing it in the right way. And so if you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, really the kind of idea of leave nobody behind is absolutely at the core of our mantra as an administration in Bristol. And so through community wealth building in renewables, such as a sleeving agreement, which helps us meet our 2025 target, that's really important. So if you keep in your mind's eye, really, that this is not just about pipes in the ground and technology solutions, this is actually about citizens today and future citizens. So in Bristol, we've got the largest heat network in the country, and we do a lot of work and a lot of engagement with Scandinavian countries who have absolutely nailed heat networks, frankly. it's an interesting dynamic, I think, when we talk to individual developers that come to the city, because I think they are shocked at the depth of our commitment to expanding our heat network and our ambition about how far in the city we'd like our heat network to reach. Right now, as we sit here, we are on the cusp of completing a 3 megawatt water source heat pump right in the city centre. That's the largest heat pump in the UK. It's on our own land, and I think that's really when we meet the private sector in the city, we don't just, force this stuff through planning policy and heat hierarchies and the like. We're actually at the table doing this ourselves, so we put our own land in. Our own housing development company is actually delivering with Vital Energy the actual water source heat pump in our park, and we plan to build homes on top of it. And so we are really there trying to test this system. Our aim is to, as Mike alluded to there, is to dramatically accelerate the delivery of our heat network. So we don't really celebrate the fact it's taken 10 years to get here, and we don't have that many years until we reach our 2030 target. And so we set out to attract a joint venture partner in the city, which is called City Leap, and we're just in the contractual negotiations at the moment with our preferred partner. And so is a recognition in the city that firstly, we will not wait for government, we simply can't wait for government, and secondly, that we can't do it ourselves. And I think there's a question that we might come to later on about the role of councils in this in future, so I'll pause there. I just very quickly want to talk about people again, and I think it's really important that one, as we sit here, we've all been following the news recently, I'm sure, and so this is no longer a matter of just getting to 2030. This is about supporting people through the next decade in terms of the impact we know we will all face, regardless of your income, in terms of rising energy prices in this country. This is about energy resilience and energy security. And for me, that's one of the major, major upsides that if you think about Bristol as a city, we have 6 huge areas of growth and regeneration. Bringing district heating to those communities means that we hopefully can retrofit our existing communities, our existing community assets, and those new developments become anchor points for a real accelerated growth. I'll pause there. I'm more than happy to talk about Bristol till the cows come home, but I'll hand over to the next speaker.
I think it's...
I'm going back to Mike.
So Mike, you're going to tell us about...
I'm not the filler, yeah.
Shambles.
So from the point of view, why should property owners and developers go for heat networks?
Yeah, so I mean, to look further forward, I mean, at some point in the future, everyone's going to get told to do this. So the way the government are going is, you're going to get regulated. If you own a building or you're developing a building in an area within a city, don't do anything else because that would be stupid. District heating's the right answer. Now, what they're doing at the moment is trying to work out, well, how the hell do we do that without creating unfair monopolies and lack of choice? And it's a very messy thing. They're consulting on it at the moment, but we're expecting that to come through relatively soon. I don't want to focus on that today. I'd like to focus on the reasons why you should want to do it rather than the reasons why you are going to be told to do it. It's always better to have a carrot, isn't it? So certainly where we're working. So we're working with Related Argent in North London at Brent Cross Town. We're in the process of discussing the deal. We're very, very lucky to be picked with Amoresco to be the partners to deliver the City Leap project. We'll be doing the district heating there. We're working in Scotland in a 50-50 joint venture with Midlothian City Council, and we are working in southeast London to take heat from a big ERF, the big one owned by Corey in Belvedere, big waste-to-energy plant. We're going to take heat from that, and we're going to plug it into hopefully 20,000 home development at Thamesmead, which Peabody are doing. But at the heart of all of this is the customer and the person who lives in the building and the building owner. And they, at some point, have to have a service that's reliable. It has to be at a fair price. It has to be decarbonised, otherwise we're not really solving the problem. And it has to be something that they would choose to do. And when we're talking to property companies, the big thing we're trying to work out is looking at the process of taking land or an old property portfolio and improving it. So whether this is a retrofit process or this is like Related Argent are doing, we've bought a lot of land, we're going to go and develop it, and we're going to improve that land, and we're going to make money out of doing that, right? We're going to improve this area of the city. District heating helps you do that, is the short answer. What you do with district heating is you front load the investment. So you bring in a partner like Vattenfall, and Ken will talk a little bit about the different ways that we can fund that front end. But we come in early, we invest in the infrastructure ahead of need, that effectively increases the value of the property, a bit like putting in roads, sewers, and water networks as well. It makes it a more viable site, which makes it more attractive to plot developers to then want to come in and take those plots and develop them. For existing property owners, a lot of it is actually a lot about what Nicola was saying. It's about the resilience, it's about the quality of life for people in those buildings. It's about having a system that will work. And if you've got an existing property portfolio, right now you're looking at a kaleidoscope of different options being presented to you. So should I do heat pumps as an individual solution? Should I wait for this hydrogen ferry that's going to arrive on a dragon? No, it's a little too pejorative. Should I wait for hydrogen in the gas grid, put in a hybrid boiler, whatever that means, and later on get hydrogen in it? Or should I embrace district heating? And it's a bit of a pickly mess. The advantage of district heating for an existing property owner is it centralizes the risk, and by spreading the risk across multiple users, a bit like the gas network's done actually, by spreading the risk across multiple users, what you do is you provide a more resilient system to the end customer. They don't have to deal with small outages themselves. That's dealt with at a system-wide level. You get more efficiencies in your CapEx, so the whole thing costs you less money. And the denser the area, the better it is to do district heating. So we do both, and we're excited to do both. But the big thing is, how do we get, rather than waiting for the government to come along with a big stick and say, you should do this, how do we get property companies, existing property owners, to embrace this and want to do it faster? And for me, it's all around the ability to increase the value of the assets you're holding, decarbonize them in a resilient and secure way, and future-proof either your existing portfolio or the portfolio you're developing. How you fund that, there are many, many options, aren't there, Ken?
Tell us, Ken. Oh. Hello? Oh. We're going to be all talking all over the place, so you might want to keep us all switched on. Yeah.
Am I on?
Ken.
Yeah. Am I on?
You're on.
Fantastic.
You're on, and you're on. Go.
I had a little bit of microphone anxiety. I couldn't hear myself, but I flipped the switch. We're good. It was a brilliant entree. Thank you very much. And you're right. The theme this afternoon, I'm going to pinch it from your LinkedIn post this morning. It's bigger, faster. I'm super excited about regulation. That's why we're here today. You know, it feels like it's going to be a great enabler of the kind of growth we expect to see in the market. But this is demonstrably an investable market today. Rachael told you at the beginning, we've got 14,000 heat networks at the moment. They're not very big, across 500,000 customers. So what we're talking about is a 9-fold interest by 2050 if we're going to fulfill our potential. So I'm excited about regulation. I'm going to tell you what I think that might bring to certain investor groups in a moment. But it kind of gives lie to the fact that we're not in bad shape today. We might be pre-regulation, but this is an industry that's done a pretty good job of policing itself on a mostly voluntary basis over the course of the last few years. When Ofgem get their act together, and I think you're right, it's about 2024, isn't it? So I think primary legislation is due any day now. Then we'll get some secondary legislation. Then there's going to be about an 18-month period after that. So it's not going to happen anytime soon, but next 3 or 4 years, hopefully we'll see them there, or we'll start to see them transition in. In between times, we've got the great work being undertaken by the Heat Trust. So consumers on heat networks that sign up to the Heat Trust today are benefiting from the kind of protections they might expect under regulation, which is awesome. There is a great industry code of practice authored by CIBC and the ADE. So Ofgem aren't coming into scorched earth. This isn't Wild West right now. It's a really good, interesting, well-policed market and an investable market. But there's much, bucket loads of work to be done there. I've got 2 hats today. I'm an investor at a company called Triple Point. We've got private and institutional capital that we want to deploy in really interesting infrastructure projects. I've also been trusted with a lot of government money, which is awesome. So I had terrible imposter syndrome at events like this 2 or 3 years ago. I was a proper archivist in district heating. Over the last couple of years, managing first the Heat Network Investment Project, where we've deployed £280 million into 41 heat networks across England and Wales. Latterly with the Green Heat Network Fund, which has just kicked off, which is going to provide £288 million of grants over the next 3 years to heat networks specifically in England. Not just to the public sector, but to private and third sector borrowers too. in those markets, using grant and very cheap funding, we've built out some really big, bold, ambitious schemes, like the brilliant ones in the middle of Bristol that the councillor was talking about moments ago. I think we've given you about £16 million. It's a gig-enormous amount of money. So we've done brilliant things in Bristol, working with Mike's business, Vattenfall. We've invested in a heat network in the southeast of London that in time is going to deliver something like 75,000 homes with heat across 3 London boroughs. With deep regret, that's the exception rather than the rule. We do need to be more ambitious. It's those citywide schemes that we're super interested in. But we've also done some really cool things backing some really interesting emerging technologies. We have, not a million miles away from here in Worthing Borough Council, we've invested in what I think will be our first sewer-sourced heat network in the UK, taking warm water up from the sewer network. It's not one to dwell on, but it's interesting all the same. Up in the northeast with Durham County Council and with Gateshead, we have done some really interesting things, taking geothermal energy from disused mine workings. So mines that became disused when the coal mines shut down have filled up with warm water, and that's now being pumped to the surface and serving the communities that were ravaged when the pits were closed. Now they're getting renewable heat, affordable heat there. So there's lots going on today. We are investing today, but it's funny money from the government, which frankly isn't sustainable in the long term. And it's money from industry, people, businesses like Mike's at Vattenfall. There's also growing private equity interest in the space, but with regret, these networks aren't today providing the returns that make that sustainable in the long run, so things need to change. And regulation is part of that, which is very cool. Other things that we need and want in pretty short order, well, I guess chief among them would be some kind of political stability, and we might agree that we need to put a pin in that one for now. But what there is at least is clear direction of policy travel, I think, that goes across party. So we've got a pretty good idea what the government landscape is going to look like centrally. We need to demonstrate how these things can be profitable, not in the short term, but in the long term. These are long-term infrastructure assets. The market needs to do a lot of professionalization, and part of my job working with government is to provide standard templated contracts for developers and you all to use for sales, operation, and maintenance of heat networks. And we really need to engage our stakeholder base. Chief among them, I'm going to say, local authorities. So there's a role here for central government, of course, big role for industry. But the relatively unique role local government will play, not just in offering up its own assets as an all-important anchor load to get these things going, but as just a great coordinator of the growth of these businesses. You know, we've spoken a little about what heat networks can do for individuals in their homes and taking people out of fuel poverty, which is bewilderingly awesome. But they're also going to be an amazing driver of green jobs over the course of the next few years. These are big, complex infrastructure projects that need to be serviced by local supply chains. So local authorities as an actor motivated and mandated to think about local economic growth, I think, is super important. And what else? Well, last but not least, I guess, in the short term, we're going to continue to need that grant funding, but hopefully not for very much longer.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the investability thing. So we've got a pipeline of projects. We've only been going in the UK 4 years. We've got a pipeline of projects that's going to have us invest around 550 million in the next 8 years. Now, if you compare that to the scale of investment we put into offshore wind, we've just got approval for the Norfolk Vanguard Boreas project off the coast of Norfolk, which is going to be 7 billion in offshore wind, and that's all coming off the balance sheet. We're happy to invest off balance sheet. Now, one of the things I think is interesting for the property sector is to look at these different sources of funding. If you were developing an area as a standalone project, and you were putting in individual air source heat pumps all over the place, then effectively you're doing that yourself. You're doing that using your own working capital and doing that at risk. One of the advantages of centralizing this is that we can basically come in at the beginning. We can take on that investment. And the other important thing about doing it big is that as we make the ticket size bigger, we can start to introduce different types of money at different stages in the project. Everything's at the moment is sort of 20 to 50 million pounds. And it's not big enough for us to go out and get institutional investors ready to really wind up into this sector. What we want to be able to do, and that's why the opportunity in Bristol is so exciting, it's why South East London is so exciting, because you're talking hundreds of thousands of homes connecting to a district heating network. And that means that the quantum of investment can go up, the cost of capital can come down, and suddenly for me, if I'm looking at this as a property developer, this is now no longer something that I have to do on my own. It's a bit like going and getting Homes England funding to get something up and running.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Nicola. This is all about the pace that we need to go out, and we're very, we're all very excited about heat networks. That's why we're here. And there is this, need for momentum and pace and growth. Obviously, Bristol is being a very progressive local authority, and you're at the total vanguard of all of this stuff, and quite a some would say an aggressive planning policy to make all of these things happen, and lots of political commitment very locally, and you're sort of doing it despite what the government is doing. You're doing it ahead of regulation. All the investment is coming and all these sorts of things. So do you think local authorities should just get on with it like Bristol has been doing? To what extent do you think regulation will help?
Yeah,
and or how can, where do you see the developers and the investment community fitting in to your vision, and what other local authorities should be doing as well?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's absolutely pissing down outside, so sorry if you can't hear us. I have to speak up a little bit, I've just realised. I don't think other cities should follow us as we are right now. I think we need a dramatic shift in the way the government is run. So I guess people might have thought I was going to say, yeah, go for it. But there have been so many heart-in-the-mouth moments in the administration since 2016 as we have followed a very purposeful direction to decarbonise this city, and no administration should be put under that stress. It's like we have the most centralised governance system in the Western world in this country. It is fundamentally broken. You speak to European partners, like Portugal, Spain, obviously Scandinavia, and the reason they get this shit done is because they've got the power to do it at a local level. And I never thought as a Labour politician I'd say this, but bring back Cameron and Osborne and the devolution dream that they started, because
this is being
that
recorded.
is, yeah, that's fine. Because honestly, that is the simplest answer to your question. I think at a local level, it's fascinating to see what 12 years of austerity do in every budget round. So you'll have people placards for libraries, toilets. There's no one out there campaigning for solicitors and economists and energy specialists in councils. That just does not happen, accountants. But you need those skills in local authorities if other cities, let's just start with the core cities, let's not even talk about all the other councils in the country, but if you're going to get those local authorities shipshape and ready to face this revolution head on, they need to be funded, and we need good people in those roles, so we need to be competitive with the sector. And so that is the truthful answer. We're really proud of what we've done in Bristol, but it has led to some grey hairs and a lot of sleepless nights, and we're not there yet, it's fair to say. So I just think I'd be dishonest not to be upfront about that challenge.
He's gagging.
Okay, all right.
Desperate to
Ken,
go, because I think I agree with most of that. But I think we're almost on the cusp of not needing that much more policy now. So we've spoken about regulation, which is brilliant, and it's part of a suite of changes that is going to bring with it what we're referring to as zoning as well. So this idea that local authorities are going to have a leading role in local area energy planning and draw red line boundaries around areas within which connection to a heat network might be mandated. And that's really cool, that's really exciting. One of the things I'm looking for as an investor is some kind of demand assurance. Heat networks aren't analogous to a utility that says if you build it, they will come, because actually substantially all of the clients are already on gas and it's incredibly bloody cheap. We need demand assurance, and I think if we're not going to get that through a financial mechanism, then we're probably going to have zoning policy in that same kind of time frame before very long, and you're going to make me shut up now.
No, I wanted to come in on the same point.
Okay.
Because the challenge, zoning's really great, but at the moment demand assurance is put on the consumer.
Yeah.
So when I get deals in the UK, I sign 40-year contracts with end customers. You buy an apartment on a heat network and you get told, hello, here's your kitchen, here's your keys, there's your laundry. Oh, by the way, can you sign this 47-year contract, please? I'm like, what? I don't sign 47-year contracts, I'm Mike. And this is anomalous. We don't ask. We've got 2 million customers across our networks. None of them have to sign 40-year contracts. It's only in the UK that we've said the burden of demand assurance should sit on the consumer. The burden of demand assurance should sit on the property. It should sit on the building. So
Absolutely.
if you do zoning well and you say, guarantee me as the front-loading investor bringing billions of investment into the city to take heat from an ERF or from the river, 100 megawatts of heat in the river, Avon, in the middle of Bristol, that we could take from the river and deliver it to the buildings in the next 5 years, right? We could do it if the buildings say they want to connect. So all you've got to do is get the buildings to say they want to connect. Costs come down for every single building, and the burden isn't on the consumer. And I can give a consumer a 5-year contract or a 3-year contract, and the obligation isn't on the customer to be saddled with this. I think the policy is moving in the right direction. The only thing I would say that is I still think we're stuck at the wrong level sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you look at the ability of the government to mobilise, I'm going to trash hydrogen again. I'm really sorry.
No,
This is twice in
quite
one
right.
presentation. But if you look at the ability to get a zone set up for hydrogen, and they're also talking about doing a CFD,
Yeah.
and guaranteeing the revenue for a technology that might decarbonise within 15 years. And to qualify for the CFD, you only have to have 60% of your power used to generate the hydrogen coming from low carbon sources. So you can make it from a coal plant down the road and claim it's zero carbon and qualify for a subsidy. The ability of the government to mobilise around that versus the 3-year consultation on zoning and the implementation on zoning for district heating is staggering. And the bit that I think I would like to request of the room, and the reason I'm here at a property event, is that at the moment the government are terrified that the property market's going to run away and go, oh no, this is scary, we can't possibly do it. My conversations with property people and investors is, actually, we just want to know what you want us to do. So if I'm building here, am I doing heat pumps? If I'm doing heat pumps, give me a credible supply chain and I'll do heat pumps. If I'm building there and I'm doing district heating, give me a credible supply chain and I'll do district heating. Most property owners, developers don't mind as long as it's a quality product. And I think a bigger voice from the property sector in the discussion about regulation of energy would be a really welcome additional voice.
Absolutely. I think there's many different voices in while we've still got a moment to influence regulation, I think from all sorts, probably private and also social, housing development as well, which is, I do a lot of work in the social housing section. I think it's vital that all voices are heard, and I'm sure, when we talked before, Nicola, you were talking about, some of your constituents and making sure that, all different sorts of constituents are equally well represented in this. We're starting to get some questions in from the audience, so thank you very much. Hooray. Some of them are a bit technical. I'm going to ask one more sort of joint venture question, and then if we're going to see if we can answer the technical questions. We might not be able to.
Courtney, are you here?
There's people in the room that can.
Okay, so we might be beaming down engineers any moment. Yeah. But first of all, someone asks, it seems like a joint venture or council partnerships are essential to ensure there is local representation and coordination for heat network deployment. What do you think? Nicola first, maybe?
This question, is it essential?
Yeah.
I think in a devolved model, then the local authority definitely has a role to play. But I can't speak for all local authorities. Sure. I mean, it's I still feel a bit uncomfortable about that. But in Bristol, we're a major landowner in Bristol, so from even outside of governance and a consumer protection and a kind of doing the right thing sort of space, there's like a practical reality of the fact that the Bristol Council owns 50% of the city. So if you're talking about getting stuff done in the city, then we don't just have a facilitation role, we have a role as a landowner, and we also, I guess, we're motivated by very different things. So I think that is a commonality across all good local authorities, I would say, is that you've got the motivation, and what we don't have is necessarily the expertise, the resource, or the speed and the scale, and that's what we need.
I would say there are more local authorities with interest in doing this than there are people that can do it. So the biggest issue is the supply chain, and not do a local. I mean, there are, I don't know, how many H&DU studies, Ken? Like hundreds?
Hundreds.
Yeah, and actually
they're not seeing the light of day.
And there's been some amazingly successful projects that have come out of HNET. I mean, some wonderful projects up and down the country. And a lot of them, what you've got is the same case you have with Bristol, where local authorities have kind of incubated an idea, and to be honest, done something I think is pretty embarrassing for the private sector. It's like they've de-risked it for us. That's surely not what we should be using public sector for, but long term, what's the role of public sector? I think public sector is essential. You will not do district heat. You will not do anything in a city if you do it outside of the relationship with the local authority. It doesn't need to be a joint venture. A joint venture is great because it actually can create revenue and investment opportunity for the local authority, but some local authorities don't want that. They don't want this on the balance sheet. They say, actually, we should have social housing on our balance sheet. We should increase the number of care homes. We shouldn't have a pipe in the ground for 80 years on our balance sheet. But what you can do is set up structures where a local authority can invest at the beginning, and then over a period of time they can be bought out by their partner or by third parties, for example.
I think it's interesting. I was on a conference panel a couple of months ago with the chief exec of a big national housing association. And he was saying, there is a role for the public sector, and if you broaden it out to housing associations, I know they're a bit quasi, but he saw that they have a role as market makers. So although they are having to lead, but you sort of recognise that as part of your community leadership role is going first in some of this stuff so that others can follow.
Yeah, no, and can I just come in very quickly on that? Because I think one of my reflections at COP26 last year was, at that point we were just at a very critical moment of the City Elite Partnership. We were assessing the bids, and it was all very confidential, as you can imagine, but we went to, so Glasgow City Chambers held lots of cities events, so the core cities, top 10 cities, and Glasgow themselves at COP launched their prospectus. And it was fascinating. It was a real privilege to be there and to share our experience in the hope that those cities can do it faster and cheaper and easier at their end. Being the front runner is a privilege, but it's a challenge as well. And so that's we and there was a queue literally to speak to the Mayor Marvin about how to do this quicker.
Getting local authorities together and helping them share ideas and problems, and local authorities love talking to other local authorities, and they're hoping that the next people will stand on your shoulders, basically. So. Ken.
So I agree with all of that. The good news is I won't take up too much more time. I think I agree with the premise of the question. It is a joint venture, but it's small j, small v. They're a really important local actor. And the other thing I thought Nicola mentioned in passing, which was absolutely brilliant, is to speak about this in the context of devolution and the devolved authorities. And if there is another bit of mutually supportive policy here that we haven't spoken about yet, it's the levelling up agenda. And I think, you've shown your colours now, you're a closet Tory too. I think this is a government that's demonstrably serious about it, mostly because it's a political necessity for them. And where we've seen money going out to the regions already, it's going in the first instance to the metropolitan combined authorities, where you've got really strong local leadership, a good strong mayor. Look what Ben Houchin's achieved up in the northeast and their ability to crowd money in. A good, strong mayor is someone who's got an understanding of place and the needs of communities. I think their local authorities can take the lead role, absent central government tinkering.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we're going to shift gear a bit. I don't know if you can hear at the back, but there's been like a theme tune going on. It feels like I am,
That's not our theme tune.
We need.
It's a bit Chariots of Fire.
Comments in the chat on what our theme tune should be.
Yes, add that. We're going to take a vote on that. Okay, a couple of questions, slightly more about technology and decarbonisation and what heat networks can offer. So if we know the answers, I'm going to take two together. One is about long-term planned heat sources for these networks. So a lot of them at the moment obviously are gas. Nicola's already said that you're investing in water source heat pumps. There's a HNET project on sewer-powered, poo-powered heat networks, which is great. So it'll be interesting to hear, that. Second question is also the opportunity for more flexible demand as well, and what is the heat network's role in, that sort of stuff, and flexible tariffs and things like that. So maybe Ken's looking like, I don't know.
I'll have those.
So back to the
Mike.
money.
I'll have those. Who asked that second question? That's a great question.
If it was a Vattenfall person, it's Bindi, cheat.
What was the first one again?
It was about long-term sort of decarbonisation heat sources.
Oh yeah. Well, so if if you put a heat pump in someone's home today, then they're going to have all of the issues around the resilience of that system themselves. They have to put in their own buffer vessel, their own big kind of storage tank that goes with it. If it breaks, they have to do it themselves. They deal with all of the pricing fluctuations that go with the electricity markets. All the volatility we've seen, they've got all of that. So the goal for me with district heating is you take that shit out of it. What you want to do is shelter the end customer as much as possible from that volatility. And the way you do that is you don't have one source. That's the first most important thing. And the second thing is that you structure your tariffs in a way. So if you start at the end, start with the tariff, the way that a lot of stuff is priced is how much will you pay for it? And that's often against a counterfactual, like, okay, well, if you had a different system, it would cost you this much, and therefore I'll charge you that. And the fact that it cost me less to produce this thing for you is irrelevant. It just makes my margins bigger. So the first thing you need to do with heat networks is I think pricing should be connected to your cost of production. I think that if you can create cheaper heat, the consumer should benefit from the cheaper heat production. What does that do? Well, it incentivizes everybody to look for cheapest source of heat, right? So you're all going to start looking for it. With heat from poo, we've got heat from poo. We've had it in Sweden for 35 years. I mentioned the river source heat pump projects in Bristol, which we're going to build on. At Braincross Town, which segues me into the conversation about heat pumps and flexibility, we're putting heat pumps in, 8.5 megawatts of heat pumps, that will run both ways. So they'll do heating for heating purposes, and they'll do cooling for cooling purposes. And when we start plugging in lots of data centers that are going to be connected there's some real flexibility that you can build into that system. What does it ultimately mean? It means that by having lots of people connected into that system, by having cooling load and heating load balanced a lot of the time, I can shelter the end customer from price shocks. I have a more resilient system, so if one thing goes down, I've got other things that I can create heat from. It's a much easier system to operate. The other nod I do want to make, before I open for another question, sorry, the other nod I want to make is towards energy from waste. Completely underused in the UK. We send more waste to landfill than any other of our European colleagues, counterparts, and we still do it. It's ridiculous. And we seem to have an icky idea about, let's put it in an incinerator, let's burn it, let's collect the heat, let's connect the electricity, let's do something useful with it. Now, clearly, the goal is that you reduce lots of stuff. You take the recyclables out, you don't burn recyclables, but at some point we're going to have waste. And there is nothing cheaper as a fuel source than rubbish. So let's not use gas that we have to import from around the world. Let's not use electricity that is subject to volatile market fluctuations. Waste doesn't change in price. And there's an argument actually that heat should be free. Because we've already got a market that's existing for EFW. Give that heat for free to a district heating network to basically sell it on at a marginal tiny cost to homes in Bristol and South East London and Edinburgh.
Right.
So does that answer the question?
That'll do. Yeah. Excellent. Right, next one is, so I think it was you, Mike, in your opening remarks sort of talked about existing portfolios as well. So it is relatively easy to build a brand new heat network and dig up the roads and build it all lovely from new, relatively. A lot more difficult, I think, to link existing buildings. For people here who have existing portfolios in urban areas where there's perhaps, district pipes coming past their front door right now, zoning's going to be a thing where there's going to be more compulsion possibly to join your buildings, when your existing asset comes to end of life.
Yeah.
So how is it different if you do have an existing portfolio? What's the difference for you as a property owner? And how is the sell different for you as Vattenfall trying to get somebody to join?
The difference is that someone lives in the building.
Okay.
So technically, it's easy. It's like someone came down from Mars and said, "Oh my God, how are you going to connect an existing building?" Right? We've done thousands of them across Europe. It's easy to do. The issue is someone lives in the apartment, and you're going to go in and either take out a boiler or do something, and you're going to have to replace it with something else. So as soon as you introduce a consumer interface and an in-building element to it, then you make it more complicated. So you need to engage early, you need to communicate clearly. Sometimes you need to move people out and provide alternative accommodation. But the way you do that is you do that in partnership. It's not a unique sales challenge for us. You do it in partnership with the property company. So the property company the building owner know the people in the building. They have all these other things they have to provide to these people in this building. And our job is to integrate into that and work out, okay, well, this is how we're going to do a district heating network. I literally had a conversation yesterday with a guy where he thought it was going to be really complicated, and he was posturing all these little difficult things. I said, no. Give the whole thing to us, all the technical challenges. We'll do all of it for you. The bit I need you to worry about is the consumer engagement. How do you get people on board with this? How do we minimize disruption to them? The other thing I think is important, though, is to look at the way that you finance it and the way that you fund it, because it will be funded differently, I think, to the way that new builds are developed.
Ken, do you want to come on how they funded? Do you know?
I think you're right. So we haven't been involved in those kind of mass retrofits yet, and I think we will have to find a way, and there will be different funding arrangements, but it will be the same source of the pound notes. Fundamentally, I think I agree with Mike. We have this peculiarity about us Brits. They talk about an Englishman's home is his castle. I think that's a nut we're all going to have to crack, and there's a lot of education that needs to be done. We've done. That very clever Mr. Musk has done a great job of demonising gas-guzzling diesel cars.
Yeah.
We haven't yet convinced the public that the little white box in the corner of their kitchen is every bit as toxic.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done there. I think people haven't thought about what the decarbonisation of heat means to them as a consumer. That's a really tough sell. I don't think we can start that soon enough, to be honest.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the thing with, if we're going to get to net zero by 2030, in Bristol's case, or 2050 as a country, everybody has to do everything, right? At some point, we all, personally and as business, and it all needs doing.
But yeah, I mean, just the title of the discussion today. I don't know. We didn't pick it. It's not very sexy. We said that at the beginning.
Nor have we really discussed it, in fact.
We haven't really talked about regulation.
We're just going to talk about our stuff, right? And it'll be fine.
In reality, that's kind of, I think, what one of the problems is that the industry as a whole is a bit obsessed with regulation and navel gazing and how we're going to do it and zoning and all this kind of boring stuff. And that kind of needs to go away. Like, Nicola said at the beginning, you know, we've got constituents, we've got customers, we've got people that need to be engaged in this. And I mean, that's why we're here today. It's a property event. It's not an energy event. I spend most of my time presenting to my competitors and suppliers at energy events and then wondering why no one wants to buy district heating.
So I'm going to, so we've been talking a bit about customers and end users. So I'm going to come back to you, Nicola. Obviously, you know, you represent householders.
All householders.
All householders. They are all looking to you for an answer right now.
God.
So 2 questions. I think one, you know, with the City Leap project, you know, how are you starting to think about engaging people in what you're planning and, you know, what's going to be happening to them in their homes and how they're going to connect, number one. 2, obviously at the moment, massive energy price crisis, cost of living and all those sorts of things. And how do you think this, you know, heat networks broadly feed into that, can support it, can protect people or not? I mean, what are the challenges and risks around that? So sort of 2 questions around consumers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm more than happy to answer that. I think the first one's really interesting from a political perspective. So we started City Leap in 2017. We're in 2022. And I know when I walk down my street and I talk to my neighbours, I live in my ward, no one knows what this is, right? It's this absolutely bizarre concept that there's a small group of community energy nerds and geeks, which we love dearly, and we have a very strong community energy network in the city who are all over City Leap. They were really nervous of it at first. They got a bit kind of freaked out by the whole idea of bringing the private sector into somewhere like Bristol. You know, you can imagine the dynamic. And but in my ward, St George Central, which is a big council estate essentially, no one knows what it is. So in that ambiguity is an amazing opportunity because you're not having to talk about a 3-4 year procurement. We can talk about a service. And so the big task now as we go through 2022 is how do you launch this thing in Bristol, which I'm going to say 95% of the city doesn't know what it is. You know, you're starting afresh, and I think that is a phenomenal opportunity in Bristol to talk to the city about these opportunities. I think I'll talk about fuel stress at the very end, but I think my observation as a citizen in Bristol, and I think about my road, is we need to get to a point where people on our street have the job to work in this industry, right? So most people know Sparky, you know Chippy, you know these people who work in trades, right? These people of working age, take a boiler fitter, they're going to be out of a job in 10 years. We need those boiler fitters in Bristol to be fitting air source heat pumps. And so much so, when I was in my previous job, we had a summit in the City Hall where we brought in Gregor's and a lot of other boiler companies. They'd never been in City Hall before, you know, and we brought them in and said, like, what is going on here? Actually, there was quite a lot of air source heat fitters in the city. They're all in Wales, in Haverfordwest, because the Welsh government is funding an enormous retrofit programme. They're not in Bristol, they're commuting over the bridge every single week. And what we need is that confidence. We need people to know people that do these jobs, or their kids are studying it at college because there's funding through the City of Bristol College. So it becomes this thing that feels credible. Right now, it's steeped in suspicion. You know, you get these random phone calls on your landline to a pensioner to say, oh, we'll give you free solar panels, and everyone's shit scared of it. You know, there's a risk this whole industry falls into that category. If we're not purposeful, it's not accelerated skills, jobs, retraining people of working age, credible organisation, and that's where councils come in, I think, to give credibility to these are not scams. These are real things that you can get on board with, and I think that, in an energy crisis, is so important that we can build confidence at a doorstep level, and I'm really hopeful that City Leap, with our endorsement and the endorsement of major international players, will actually, you know, we can roll that out in Bristol. I think on fuel stress, you know, just I mean, we all follow this industry, I'm sure, to lesser or greater extent, probably more now, you're paying for it more. But, you know, by October, a third of the country is going to be under fuel stress. It's absolutely absurd. Like, if there was ever a time to get their act together on this issue, it is now. And so it gives me hope that this current government will get it done. But it shouldn't get to this point in order to make that happen. But, you know, you tell me. But it feels like they are edging to it. And I hope
so.
we get there soon.
And that's, I mean, it's tragic what's happening in Europe at the moment. It's the worst possible set of circumstances. But it has created this separate imperative. You know, what was my story was dominated by net zero and the role heat networks play in the transition to net zero by 2050. And now it's an argument that's being dominated by the need for domestic resilience. You know, there's a more reason than ever why we want to be off gas, why we want a little bit more resilience here in the UK. So yeah, it's tragic, it's awful, but it has created some wind in our sails, and we've got to start doing the stuff, continue to be doing the stuff now.
Great. Well, we've got 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left, which is, hasn't it gone by quick?
Let him
Haven't
sing
we
his
had
song.
fun?
Go on.
Mike, song. Go on, we practiced. Good. No. Right, so I'm going to do my sort of wrap-up question, and this was actually the question that came in first, so bringing it back to regulation, and you can take this in part regulation up. So the question is, what 3 things do you want Ofgem to do to provide effective regulation for both consumers and market participants? I'm going to broaden that out. I'm going to ask you each for your sort of takeaway messages. You're going to have 1 minute each. You know, one thing on regulation, what do you really, you know, hope for in regulation? But your second or third points possibly, broadly, what are your takeaway? These wonderful, happy, smiling people here, what do you want them to be the takeaway from today? So we go along first. So Mike, yeah.
I think my one thing I would like the government to do is to do zoning with incentives rather than zoning with stick. So I would like the government to divert, and you and I have talked about this, I would like the government to sit down with the property sector and say, how can we give you money to incentivize you when you're within this zone to connect to a district heating network, and not ask me, because I want to do district heating.
Yeah.
So that would be my one thing.
Okay.
What was the second question?
And your general takeaway for everybody from today?
My general takeaway is please go and talk to whoever you talk to in government about that. Because the energy sector isn't a big enough voice. And actually, to be honest, we lose when it comes toe-to-toe with the money from BP and Shell. Sorry to put the boot in, but we don't win. Which is why you see a lot more in the press about hydrogen than you do about district heating. Proven technology and it works, and it doesn't get the same column inches. So I would love it if the property sector would become a champion voice for, we want something that works, please. We don't want test balloons. Thanks very much.
Great. Okay. Nicola.
So we're talking to BEIS quite a lot at the moment, and we really want Ofgem to work with cities to get this right first time, or as close to right as they possibly can. We don't. It's not experimental. It's happening right now. It's real, and you know, it's not just Bristol. There are the core cities together represent more than 55% of the population of this country. So decarbonisation will happen in cities. It is already happening. The regulator's playing catch up. Let's just work together to get that right. And my ask of everyone here today is just try saying yes first, so you don't have to fight about it. Because you know, if you just say yes, just be purposeful about the kind of massive opportunities and the longevity that we want your building to be successful in our city. And it cannot not really have district heating if you're in an urban centre, or at least have the readiness for district heating, and we're very pragmatic about that. So try saying yes first rather than fight it later.
Excellent. And Ken.
So I need new ones now. Back to the investment point, I think, because we haven't spoken about the numbers that are involved in this. We've given you some of them, this kind of 2% to 18% thing. When I was launching the HNIP 3 years ago, BEIS were describing this as a £20 billion investment opportunity just in district heating. I think I've seen 80 billion ascribed now, latest after the work of the Heat Network Industry Council. It's giganormous. It can't be afforded by public funds. We need to engage private capital. So Ofgem's role, it's those investor protections. It's making this look like a utility type investment. rights and power parity with other utilities. We had tragic situations in lockdown where heat network workers were being challenged by police out on the streets. They weren't key workers. I mean, that's an absolute nonsense. So a good, credible, powerful regulator like Ofgem, I think, nails that. And we have a very investable sector in really dramatically short order. And then I think the kind of the bolder ambition is I think we get cracking. I think we probably are now due a little bit of a policy reset. There's enough going on. We're not talking about a nascent market in the UK. We're not looking to neighbours in Scandinavia to figure out how to do it. We've got a good, strong supply chain in the UK. It needs to grow, and it needs to grow really fast. We're going to be massive recruiters. One thing we haven't spoken about today is that the three of us are involved in different diversity and inclusion groups across the heat network world. We're doing that because we need to crowd people in. You know, this is a space that's going to grow and grow enormously. So, yeah, I'm ready to get going.
So amazing. Well, time is up. You know, watch your space. Heat networks are happening. They are investable. They are good for the planet, and they are good for your local communities. Great. But thank you all very much.
Bye.
It's been absolutely amazing. 3:30.
3:30.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rachel.
I think events like these are going to set a framework for the discussions ahead, and the calibre of collective voices that we've got in this room is absolutely fundamental to the challenges ahead.
Coming to listen to the conferences, then you're going to be overwhelmed with material. There are, I think, 4 theatres, there are think tanks. It will keep you going all day long.
The reason I came was the diversity of the programme, and it's all about, you know, what are we going to do about climate change and carbon.
How can actually all those industries work together to get the right solution? They can do that in this room, over a coffee or with a glass of wine maybe.
I think the highlight to me was the think tank that we ran. We got loads of great engagement, and it was really nice to have a conversation with industry about how we might tackle some really big problems. And so I think we've won quite a lot of work in the last 3 days, which is really awesome.
We deliver a lot of modular buildings, so modern methods of construction, so this event is ideal for us. So on the first day we held our own fringe event, and we actually won quite a substantial project on that night.
This exhibition is going to grow. This subject matter is the most key in our industry. If you're not here, you will be left behind.